Hello everyone, how's it going, and welcome to my Wild Rift tier list for patch 3.0b. In this video, I'm going to go through every single role in the game, explain to you why champions are in certain positions. Obviously, this is a solo queue tier list for all ranks, so I look at how easy the champion is to play, how strong the champion is to play at all ranks, and I try and give you all the best and in-depth detail that I can. Now, let's start things off with the Baron lane. Now, not much has changed in the Baron lane, I'll be totally honest with you. I think Fiora is still the queen of the Baron lane at the moment, closely followed behind by some other champions, which I'll explain in a second. Just so you know, the champions from left to right are not in any order at all. They're just all in the same tier, and I'll explain to you, each champion individually. But yeah, Fiora, the queen of the Baron lane, she's been really strong in both competitive, and she's a really strong solo queue pick as well, both in the top lane and in the jungle. So no real surprise that she's up there as well. I would say closely followed behind by the likes of Kha'Zix and Darius, and even Renekton. I think these first three champions are also very strong. Darius has just a great build that he can go. He can go like Black Cleaver into full tank. He can go Trinity Force if he wants to as well. He's really good against all these AD bruiser champions at the moment, all these melee champions that are currently in the meta. You don't really see a lot of mages getting played in solo queue. So you normally see like low range AD carries with a lot of AD bruisers and a lot of assassins as well. And Darius loves that. He loves to stack his passive. He loves to be against some AD bruisers. So he's really good. Obviously, Renekton as well. Renekton with like Blade Rune King and Black Cleaver, really strong. He's really strong in the laning phase as well. I think that's where his kind of strong point is. But he can still do well when it comes to mid and the late game as well, especially with the items that he has available. Really strong, really tanky, does a lot of damage, and yeah, overall is just a great champion. Set as well, even after the nerfs, I still think Set is quite strong. He still just offers so much to the team, so much crowd control. You have the shield as well, you have the true damage, which is really strong as well. And even though he did get nerfed, his attack speed build with the Blade Rune King, with the Black Cleaver and items on top of that as well, still works really well in my opinion. Now, moving on to the other champions, I think these champions are kind of fallen off a little bit, but they're still really strong. Jace, I still feel like he's really strong. He can offer a lot to the team. He's just fallen off a little bit. He doesn't do as much damage as what he did before. His melee form is still really good, but he can struggle, if he's trying to all in against the likes of Set, Renekton, Darius, and even Fiora. He kind of wants to scale up into the mid and late game, and he just wants to do as much damage as possible when it comes to mid and late game. So early game, it can be a little bit of a struggle with him, but he still can work. He still can be really strong. Obviously, Camille, with all the lockdown and the split push potential that Camille can offer, you can hook shock away, you can hook shot into team fights. You still have the Hextech ultimatum, even though it did get nerfed, it still offers the same thing as what it did before, just locking down the target, which would be so crucial in team fights as well. And Garen is just the easiest Baron laner to play. Even if you're behind with Garen, you could just go full tank. You can be really tanky, do a lot of damage, and yeah, just be really strong overall. And obviously he's really good in the laning phase as well. He doesn't really die that much. He doesn't take a lot of damage. And yeah, overall, just a really great champion. Moving on down to the A+ tier. Akali is still finding her way in the S+ tier. I still think she's quite strong. You're seeing her a little bit more in the mid lane now, though, compared to Baron lane, because Baron lane Akali does have a few bad matchups. I think Akali kind of struggle against all the champions above because they're bruisers. They like to engage and try and fight early on, which Akali doesn't want to do. Akali does not want to fight at all early on. He wants to stay passive, he wants to stay safe, and try and farm into the mid and late game, which is where you can execute and utilize Akali's mobility. Gragas, we're not seeing him a lot in the Baron lane, again, mainly in the mid lane, but he's still a really good Baron lane champion. You can build in tank, you can build in full AP if you want to. Full AP build has definitely been a lot more popular, especially with Electrocute now being buffed, which is a little bit of a buff to Gragas AP. But yeah, not really seeing him too much in the Baron lane, but you're seeing him here and there, and he is still a really strong champion. His explosive cast, his extra healing and everything as well, it's just really helpful for Gragas. Wukong, another champion that we don't really see too much anymore. We don't really see him in the jungle or the top lane anymore, to be fair. But I still feel like he can offer a lot, especially in solo queue games as well. You could definitely catch a lot of people off guard with his clone as well. And he's just a great team fight champion as well. In solo queue, sometimes it relies on that early game team fight, especially at 4 minutes in the game with the dragon, which Wukong is really strong at. You can go like Black Cleaver first item again before first dragon, and you could be really strong during that first team fight. Olaf mainly played in the jungle, but has been seeing a little bit of play in the Baron lane as well, in solo queue and in competitive as well. He does really well, especially at level 1. I think Olaf is one of the best level 1s out of all the champions, really. in this tier list. Being able to use his axe and just throw his axe multiple times, do a lot of damage. He could definitely win out trades early on. And obviously, the lower on health Olaf gets, the more attack speed he gets as well. He has a lot of healing. He's tanky. He can obviously be unstoppable as well with Ragnarok. So overall, just a great champion that you can, you know, utilize pretty well, especially in the solo queue because of the Ragnarok ability, his ultimate, being able to just run around and do whatever you want. Pantheon is all about that early game snowball potential that Pantheon can offer. He has a lot of burst potential in the laning phase. He has his ultimate as well that he can use to rotate around the map, which is very helpful. And you'll be able to just get that early game snowball lead that you want to get with Pantheon. But if you do fall behind when it gets to the mid and the late game, it can be a little bit of a struggle for Pantheon. You know, you won't be able to scale as much as like you know, a Set, a Darius, or anyone like that. So with Pantheon, he is quite strong still, but you do need to try and get that early game lead so you can snowball your lead and try and get a few items to get into the mid and the late game. Malphite is, you know, he's a tank at the end of the day. You know, Malphite, you can build him AP if you want to as well. Like we've seen like full AP Malphite. Wouldn't really recommend it, to be fair. I think tank Malphite is a lot better than full AP Malphite, but full AP Malphite can definitely work. Yeah, it's, you know, he's still completely fine at the end of the day. You're still building full tank. He's still very useful in team fights with his ultimate unstoppable force. And yeah, he's just very, very helpful for a team comp to have. Irelia up there as well. Irelia is still really, really strong. Irelia has been seeing more and more play as well, mainly in the mid lane, to be fair, against assassins and against mages as well, because of the early aggression that Irelia can offer. If you do land your third ability and if you keep stacking your passive to get the extra attack speed and keep landing resets on your first ability, then you could be really, really strong in the early game. I think Irelia can struggle a little bit against these other AD bruisers in the Baron lane, but in the mid lane, I definitely feel like she is a lot stronger. She's very, very unique as well with the way she plays. She can dash around team fights multiple times, and yeah, as I mentioned, she can be really, really strong. Riven, we haven't really seen too much about, but I still feel like Riven is, you know, completely fine. I feel like she is still really, really strong. A lot of mobility, a lot of damage. It's just her build and everything in general is a little bit all over the place at the moment. She likes to build like Black Cleaver, but she doesn't really use Black Cleaver that well. You got the likes of like Solari Charge Blade, which she uses sometimes as well. Death Stance. You're seeing Riven in other regions in competitive, but not really in Europe. Hasn't really been that high a priority. But I still feel like Riven is completely fine. I feel like you could definitely still carry with Riven. And to be honest, she's not really the hardest champion to play as well. Jarvan, we're not really seeing too much in the Baron lane, but he is still a really, really strong champion. He can still offer so much during team fights with the Cataclysm, Flag and Drag as well. You can try and get the early game trades off. Same with Graves as well. Early game trades is really, really strong with Graves. You go for like this crit build, which we're not really seeing too much anymore of Graves. See him a little bit in the jungle here and there, but he just struggles in the team fights. He struggles with them small skirmishes as well. But if you can get the you know, a little bit of an early game lead with Graves, if you can stay back and if you can trade really well with your bullets and with all your abilities, he can definitely, you know, do really well and scale well into the mid and late game. Kennen is a big bully. Honestly, Kennen can probably use Electrocute quite well now in the phase. He's received a lot of buffs as well with kind of early game pressure and kind of cutting more out of late game Kennen, but put it more into the early game with Kennen. Obviously, with Electrocute buff as well, you can try and poke her passive. You can try and do a lot of damage. Just overall, like AP champions, and Kennen doesn't really do well again against bruisers. That's why she's down here in the A tier, but still completely fine. Jax has obviously received quite a few nerfs now. I still think Jax is fine in the jungle, but I feel like Baron lane he can struggle, because the thing is with Jax is he's a very mid and late game champion, or very late game champion really. You need like 3 or 4 items until Jax can become useful. The problem is that you usually kind of get shut down in the laning phase early on in the Baron lane, which is why Jax jungle is more popular than Jax in the Baron lane, because in the Baron lane you can come under threat from a gank or from you know, trying to trade 1 versus 1 against the other Baron laner. But in the jungle, you can just farm up. You can just farm up, gank every now and again, take the scuttle crabs, and you'll be able to scale easier into the mid and late games. That's why Baron lane Jax is not as strong as jungle Jax, but it still can work. You just need to play very, very safe in the early game. Dr. Mundo as well, just a tank, really, really good against AP compositions, really good against a lot of crowd control as well because of his passive. The problem is that Dr. Mundo, with Dr. Mundo, is that there's not really a lot of AP champions at the moment. You know, there's not really a lot of crowd control. Well, there is a lot of crowd control in the game, sorry. There's just not a lot of AP damage that people are really going at the moment. You know, it's all about these AD bruisers. It's all about the AD assassins as well. And there's not really any AP champions that are really in the meta which Mundo can really counter. It also takes quite a while to get online as well. Sunfight into Spirit Visage into Deadman's Plate is normally the way to go, but you have to, spend quite a lot of gold to get to that point of the game. And he doesn't really do too well in trades in the early game as well. He can do a lot of damage, to be fair, but on the tanky, he's just not that good on the tanky side. We saw him a little bit in competitive, but he's kind of fallen off a little bit. B tier, you just have, the standard champions really in B tier. I don't think I need to explain too much about these. Singed is very unique, very, very interesting champion that he doesn't really see too much play, to be fair, because he doesn't really offer too much. He can easily get kited around. Can't really do that much with Singed. Obviously, you could just keep running around and you can just tank up a lot of damage. But for Singed, he still can work. But like I said, very unique. Can struggle a lot in the laning phase as well, especially in the late game. When it gets to mid and late game, he can look to try and run around the team, but it's so easy to kite around Singed as well and kind of, I guess, counter the way that his playstyle works. His playstyle is just all about just running into the back line, using his poison to run around and using his pull that he puts on the floor to stop dashes. But to be honest, it's really easy to just kite around him, crowd control him, and there's nothing really that he can do. Same with Trendemir as well. Really easy to kite around, really easy to play against. Obviously, he can be a little bit annoying at times with his ultimate, but to be honest, with the amount of crowd control and the amount of AD bruisers and tanks that are in the game at the moment as well, and the amount of crowd control there is in the game, just makes Trendemir really, really hard to play. But he still can work, but again, Trendemir is all about the late game. Pretty similar to Jax, I guess, in a way. You need 3 or 4 items until he can become useful, and even then, he still can struggle a little bit. KO is just in a really, really tough spot at the moment. Probably one of the weakest laning phases out of all the Baron lane champions at the moment. Doesn't have the scaling attack speed that she had last time. Doesn't have the scaling damage that she had last time as well. And her early games got weaker. So she's got weaker in the mid, in the mid and in the late game. So just overall very, very weak. And yeah, the last two, I don't think I need to talk too much about the last two, Nasus and Teemo. Yeah, they're just not very good. Obviously, Nasus needs to get the stacks, but it's really hard to get stacks on Wild Rift because the laning phase basically ends at 4 minutes, so you'll find it hard to roam around the map and get stacks, which can be quite difficult. And Teemo just doesn't offer anything. He's a bit of an annoying champion, but he doesn't really offer too much. All right, going to the jungle now. Again, not really much has changed here, to be honest. I've got a few champions in B tier, which I'll talk about in a second. S plus, exactly the same. Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, still 2 of the strongest junglers in the game right now. Both for different reasons. Obviously, Lee Sin for his early game pressure, the amount of mobility that he has as well, and the way he can just kick an enemy into your team as well, and the way he just move around during team fights as well, just makes him really, really strong. Obviously, his damage is insane as well. The items that he builds are really, really strong at the moment. You can go for many different builds as well. Just overall, a really, really great champion to play. Kha'Zix as well, more to do with assassinations. Obviously, we kind of want to wait with Kha'Zix. You don't want to really be in the team fight. You want to wait until it's low enemy health bars. And when there is low enemy health bars, you'll be able to jump around and get all your resets with Kha'Zix and do a lot of damage. So no surprise that obviously Lee Sin and Kha'Zix are still up there as 2 of the best junglers in the game. Nunu is still up there. I still think Nunu is a very, very strong champion. A really, really good tank as well if you do need that tanky frontline as well. Is really good for early ganks as well with the snowball that he has. Biggest snowball ever. He can look to roam around the map very, very quickly. And as I mentioned, he has the best objective control in the entire game. The consume plus smite combo is really, really hard to deal with. So if you want to try and control around objectives, you want to take the dragons and the barons and even the rift heralds, and Nunu is a great champion. As I said, he's a tank as well. Just build him full tank and you can be really, really strong. Olaf I've kind of mentioned about briefly already, but Olaf again is really, really strong. With the Ragnarok and everything. And the great thing with jungle as well is that you can play, you're not going to get into these crazy skirmishes in the early games. You can try and get your first item very, very quickly. You could just farm around the jungle. You don't need to really do anything. And when Olaf gets like 2 or 3 items, then he kind of becomes unstoppable. You know, you group Olaf with like a Lulu and a Yuumi. He can just run rampant. The great thing is that he doesn't get crowd control either because of his ultimate. So really, really strong. Evelyn is still a great solo queue champion. Obviously, you never see the champion in competitive. That's because, you know, players can easily play around champions like Evelyn. The great thing about Evelyn is that she's really good at picking people off that are by themselves, which obviously happens a lot more in solo queue than it does in competitive. Because in competitive, you know, you're always communicating. You got 5 versus 5. You know, they're always everyone's in voice chat. Everyone's always communicating. You know, you got the vision control. You always got enemy. You always got people that are grouped together. But it always seems to be that person in solo queue that kind of, you know, goes solo in a lane or something, which allows Evelyn to easily sneak up and get kills. So obviously, Evelyn really, really strong in solo queue. Really, really nice to play. Jace I mentioned briefly as well. Still quite strong in the jungle. Still really, really good. He can clear really, really easily as well. And again, he works really well with all the strong items at the moment, like Black Cleaver, Ghost Blade, Edge of Night, all these sort of AD bruiser items that can be really, really good. Fiora as well, again, same situation as Baron Lane. Honestly, Fiora could probably move up to the S+ tier. I just feel like at times she can be quite difficult to play. That's why I've moved her down to, not moved her down, but I've kept her in the S tier for now. Because at times you can go a little bit too aggressive with Fiora, and you can, if you don't time your riposte well, which is the second ability for Fiora, which can kind of counter any crowd control coming towards you. Obviously, Fiora's quite squishy, so she can struggle a little bit. Camille still really strong in the jungle. You know, her ganking potential is so crazy. Hook shot into the back line. Use your ultimate as well. You can gank really easily. You can farm really easily as well. The only problem with Camille is that normally you go 24's first items. So you're not going to have that level 4 power spike that other champions have, because most of the time you see Black Cleaver's finished, Rod of Ages, Luden's Echo. You know, all these items, all these cheap items that champions get early on, you're not going to get that with Camille, because Camille wants to go 24. She doesn't work well with Black Cleaver, because she doesn't really use it too well. So yeah, a little bit of an early game struggle for Camille, but when you scale into the mid and late game, her ultimate is probably one of the best ultimates in the game. Morgana, again, a very solo queue pick. You don't really see Morgana that much in jungle at the moment. Very, very solo queue pick. But she has one of the fastest jungle clears in the entire game. And then she can look to roam around. Use the Dark Binding. She has a lot of wave clear as well. A lot of damage potential. Obviously, her ultimate is great during team fights as well. And yeah, just overall a great champion. Jax I mentioned briefly as well in the jungle. Obviously, with Jax, you just want to farm in the early game. You don't really want to trade early game against any other champions. You just want to farm up. Try and get to your 2 and 3 item power spikes as soon as possible. And when you get there, you'll be completely fine. Yeah, Jack scaling into the mid and late game, really, really strong. Set, I've moved back up to S tier, actually. I feel like I kind of downgraded Set a little bit. I feel like Set is still completely fine in jungle. If I remember correctly, I put him down in A+ tier, all the way from S+ down to A+. I think that was a little bit too harsh. I still think Set in the jungle can still work really well. And I think the champion overall is still completely fine as well. Obviously he's not as strong as what he was before the buffs, but with the items that you have, Blade of Rune King, Black Cleaver, he can still clear the jungle very, very quickly. He can be really, really strong. A+ Rengar, obviously another great solo queue pick, doesn't really get played in competitive, very similar to Evelyn in a way. If you find a champion that's kind of isolated away from the team, then you can easily use your ultimate and one shot with Rengar as well. Again, more of a solo queue pick than competitive pick. That's why you're not really seeing Rengar in competitive, even though we did see it yesterday in the WREC. It didn't really do too well, to be fair. They did win in the end, but to be honest, it wasn't really because of the Rengar. But yeah, really good jungle clear. Really good way of just being able to jump around during team fights as well. And yeah, just a lot of burst damage, which is always really good for a jungler. Vi, her lockdown potential is absolutely insane. If you're against like a heavy poke comp, I would say in a way, like say you're against like a Ziggs, Jace, Xayah, for example, or actually no, Xayah's a bad example. So like a Caitlyn or something, then Vi is great. So Vi can obviously use the ultimate assault and battery to lock down one of those targets. And obviously Vi most of the time builds like 1 damage item and then tank items after that. So she can be that frontline tank as well, but do a little bit of damage at the same time. And when you have that lockdown potential, when you have that guaranteed lockdown potential, it makes it really, really easy for the rest of your team to follow up as well and do a lot of damage. Jarvan I've already mentioned a little bit briefly. I think Jarvan in the jungle is all about the early game, really. Obviously, you have your Cataclysm when it comes to mid and late game. When you get to level 5, you'll be able to use your Cataclysm to, you know, kind of lock down the members, but not in the same way as Camille does. Obviously, if there's any dashes on the enemy team, I wouldn't really recommend taking Jarvan like Ezreal and champions like that because they can easily jump away. But the early game, the flag and drag combo at level 2 is really, really good. If you get a cheese gank at level 2 with the flag and drag combo, you can blow flashes. You can try and get first blood if you want to as well. Really, really strong champion. It was quite a strong champion and competitive as well. When it was like red buff into mid lane gank, into pushing mid lane and into scuttle crabs. There was a situation where like that was really strong. And you can cheese and you can do quite well. Graves obviously has the same jungle clear. Is mainly played in the jungle, to be fair. Only problem with Graves is, as I said, you know, your skirmishes and your team fight and is not as impactful as other champions. And the build at the moment for Graves is a little bit all over the place. The items don't really work out too well at the moment. And obviously Graves got nerfed quite a while ago as well. Wukong, obviously, right, are trying to move Wukong out of the jungle into Baron lane. So there's been multiple nerfs to Wukong in the jungle. Obviously, he can still work. Obviously, these champions in A+ can still work. But I'm just trying to explain to you why I put them this low. Obviously, Wukong's obviously still quite a lot in the jungle. But his jungle clear is quite slow now because he doesn't get the extra damage and everything from his abilities. Because I said they've nerfed Wukong jungle a lot. He used to be one of the strongest junglers, actually. But now they've just nerfed him quite a lot. And they're trying to move him more into the Baron lane, which is not really getting played too much. So a little bit of a unfortunate situation. But yeah, Wukong, still fairly good. Can still do very well, but not as strong in terms of, you know, jungle clear and everything. But in team fights can be really, really strong. Pantheon, as I mentioned already, is all about the early game. You want to try and get the early game pressure. The great thing about jungle Pantheon is that you can always look to every single lane. And you can always look to use your Grand Skyfall to try and go across the map. You can use this to gank multiple lanes. You can use this to counter gank, to try and steal objectives, or to even try and take objectives. Excuse me, at the same time. And yeah, just overall, can still work really, really well. Obviously, it has the shield and everything, so he can block quite a lot of damage. But I think just as a champion as a whole, compared to other junglers, there's just a lot of junglers that can do more than him. Obviously, he just has one lockdown potential, and then after that, he can do like quite a lot of burst damage. But again, he's one of them champions that can get CC quite easily and countered quite easily. Riven, for her mobility around the jungle, can work really, really well. You can clear the jungle quite quickly as well, because all of her, well, her first and her second ability has AoE damage. So you can clear through the jungle very, very quickly, on top of the cleave damage that you get from auto attacks as well in Wild Rift. Obviously, her mobility throughout the jungle as well. Her gank potential is very, very good. But again, she's just not as strong as the other junglers at the moment that are in S tier, just because her damage output and everything overall, you know, Riven most of the time is used to her, you know, you ulti, you dive in, and you kind of burst the enemy champions down, but it doesn't feel like that really happens in Wild Rift. You're kind of more to do with the early game with, I'm not early game, sorry, you're more, you know, in Wild Rift, it's all to do with like them long, drawn out team fights, which is why Conqueror is such a strong route as well. A new addition to the jungle is Gragas. I want to quickly talk about Gragas jungle very briefly. Obviously an AP damage source in the jungle. Jungle Gragas did get buffed in the recent patch. Did get bonus AD. Not bonus AD, did get increasing basic AD by 6, I believe it was, if I remember correctly. So it just helps his jungle clear a lot. Getting an extra 6 bonus AD on the jungle clear with the amount of times Gragas auto attacks in the jungle as well, with his other abilities, is really, really good. Allows him to clear through the jungle a lot quicker. With Gragas as well, you're running Electrocute that got buffed as well. And also the build at the moment for Gragas is just really, really strong. Luden's Echo, Death Cap, Void Staff. And all it is with Gragas, with 4 AP Gragas, is you're looking for the one-shot combo. Looking to jump in, one-shot someone, and just delete them off the face of the map. I have to get through this quite quickly. I'm already at 23 minutes. I'm only on jungle. Xin Zhao is honestly really, really good, to be fair. I think Xin Zhao, it definitely works really, really well in the jungle. He can gank quite easily, but it's just one of them situations where his disengage is really good. His engage potential is just not quite there. You know, compare Gragas to Xin Zhao, and Gragas has so much better engage potential. That's kind of what jungler needs. You need to kind of engage with the jungler, or being able to do just quite a lot of damage. Already spoke about Tryndamere and Dr. Mundo, but I think their situation in Baron lane is kind of the same with jungle as well. Mundo, obviously not really a jungler now since the rework, but it can still work, but it doesn't really just do as much as what he did before. And Tryndamere, again, is just a very unique champion. If you can farm in the early game with Tryndamere and kind of avoid them early game team fights and get into the mid and late game, it can work very, very well. B tier. All of these are very unique champions. I kind of explained it last time, but none of these have really changed. I could maybe move like Master Yi up, to be fair, because I feel like Master Yi is probably better than Rammus, Shyvana, and Mumu. But yeah, all the champions are just very unique. Obviously, Rammus is a full tank. Likes to play against a heavy AD comp because he likes to go Thorn Mail. He has scaling armor as well. Conditioning got buffed as well, which is really, really good for Ramos. Ramos. I completely forgot the word there for a second. Rambus, sorry. Yeah, conditioning works quite well for Rambus to scale into mid and late game. Obviously, Master Yi, very, very unique champion. Obviously, like I said, he just gets countered by crowd control again. He can't be slowed or anything, but he can still get hit by crowd control. And yeah, unless you have like a Lulu, you go for like some sort of funnel comp or something, then it might be okay, but most of the time it doesn't really work too well for Master Yi. Obviously, these champions are quite easy to play, but they're just not really that good. Obviously, Master Yi is quite easy to play. Maybe in lower elos, it can be quite good. You know, Master Yi, Shyvana could maybe work, but it's very, very difficult. Yeah, Shyvana overall just doesn't have anything to offer. She doesn't offer great engage. She doesn't have a lot of damage. Her build is just all over the place at the moment because there's not really anything benefit from her. And obviously the problem is with Shyvana is she wants to focus on the dragons. But the problem with Shyvana is that she doesn't offer anything during dragon fights. Like I said, she has no team fight potential, no engage, no damage at all. She's just going to run you down and try and do as much damage as possible. So yeah, you got you got someone that can't really team fight and someone that wants to focus on dragons. So it's kind of counter intuitive to itself. And Amumu as well, obviously full tank, but Amumu doesn't really offer too much. If you can land the Curse of Sand Mummy, if you have all full AP team, you could do a lot. But yeah, clears the jungle really, really slowly. Doesn't have a big mana pool. And yeah, just overall, not a great champion. Right, mid lane. Middle lane. Let's take a look at the middle lane. Okay, so first two champions have not changed again. I feel like a lot of this tier list has not really changed, to be fair, because there hasn't really been that many changes. I think it will take a while for the meta really to shift, because this has only been really like rune changes and everything, so it's been very interesting. But Zed really, really strong. You could probably run Electrocute now on Zed for the early game pressure, but Conquest Zed, in my opinion, is still superior. So very, very strong champion to play. Very, very, very good champion. Very unique as well. Very, very cool to play. Has a lot of mobility, has a lot of damage. Obviously, is assassin as well, and is great. Dinah, completely different. Obviously, is an assassin as well, but it's great during team fights. You can still try and solo 1v1 kill someone with Dinah. It can still work, but most of the time, you're going to be looking for the team fight potential with the Moonfall from Dinah, because if you can combo that with, like, I don't know, Cataclysm or Hextech Ultimatum or something like that, you can get huge damage off with the full stack of Dinah. Moving on to the S tier, I've briefly mentioned about Irelia and how strong she is in the mid lane, about her early game potential, what she can offer as well. Again, against all these mages in the mid lane, which don't really have a lot of early game pressure, you can definitely utilize that as an Irelia. You can try to play aggressive and try and get an advantage. You know, you can rotate around the map a lot easier as a mid laner as well. And you can just make some really, really nice plays as well. Katarina, a very, very nice solo queue pick. Feels like a lot of people in solo queue don't really know how to deal with Katarina. Obviously, it's a little bit different in competitive, because competitive, you could just draft like a really heavy crowd control team comp, and you can always just communicate when to use your crowd control. But obviously, that's a little bit different in solo queue, which is why, in my opinion, Katarina is still a really, really good solo queue pick right now. If you can get that early lead, and if you can just get a few kills under your belt with Katarina, you could just keep jumping around and resetting all the time and doing so much damage. And honestly, when a Katarina gets going, she is really, really hard to deal with. Twisted Fate obviously is more about helping the rest of your team, more about rotating around the map and using your ultimate to try and make plays around the map at the same time. And yeah, just overall not really there for the damage, more there for the stun bot, and more there for helping the rest of your team carry as well. So that's why you're not really seeing TF as like a main carry in the mid lane at the moment, but can still do really, really well and can still look to rotate around the map and use the ultimate to do quite a lot for your team. Ziggs, obviously, one of the most disgusting champions in the game. I just hate playing against Ziggs all the time. We see him in a bit in the duo lane now as well, but Ziggs just throws all his bombs out, does a lot of damage, and just absolutely ridiculous to play, to be honest with you. Always does the most damage for your team, always can just stay back and play really, really passive, and just really annoying overall, and he's still really, really strong at the same time. Galio, for a completely different reason. Obviously, is there for the team fights. If you're against any AP mid laners, then Galio's really good as well because he has the AP shield, has a taunt and a crowd control and everything available. He can build different things as well. He can go for full tank. He can go for like a hybrid build, so a bit of tank or a bit of AP, or he can go for a full AP build depending on the situation of the game. Yeah, his ultimate's really strong as well in team fights. As mentioned, his taunt's really strong. He has a lot of wave clear, and overall, he's just a really, really good champion. Yasuo, again, not really used in competitive, but again, is more of a solo queue pick. If you know how to play Yasuo, and if you're very comfortable with Yasuo, you could definitely look to try and 1v9 games for sure. His main factor is obviously going for Solari Charge Blade as his first item, which allows him to get 100% crit after using the ability. And then after that, you can go for like Blade Rune King, Infinity Edge, and just deal a lot of damage. Well, so most of the time Yasuo can be really, really strong. He can struggle a little bit as well. You know, most of the time we see like, you know, memes with Yasuo, 0-10 Yasuo's power spike, things like that, but he still is a really, really strong champion. Ahri's there for the pick potential. Her charm and everything is really, really strong at the moment. Obviously, Electrocute got buffed as well, so Ahri has also got a little bit of a buff if you can trade a lot easier with Electrocute. But yeah, looking to rotate around the map again, looking to roam around the map, use the charms and use the pick potential that she has to kind of catch an enemy off guard, maybe camp in a bush here and there as well. Orianna, kind of similar to Ziggs in a way, very late game scaling damage mage that likes to just farm up in the early game, and then you look to scale into the mid and the late game. Yeah, has a really, really good ultimate. Her shockwave is really, really strong. Has shielding, movement speed available, slows available. Has so much to offer with her robotic ball that she has as well, and just really, really strong. Has a lot of wave clear as well. Just has a lot of benefits to Orianna, which is why she's really, really strong in both the duo lane and also the mid lane. Jace, we don't really get to see him too much in the mid lane, but he is still quite strong. He can trade very well against these assassins in the early game because his melee form is very, very strong. He can obviously poke as well with his Shock Blast Acceleration Gate combo. Yeah, I spoke a little bit about Jace already. I spoke a little bit about Gragas as well, but Gragas in the mid lane has gotten a lot of popularity now with Electrocute and with the 4 AP build that I mentioned briefly with Jungle Gragas. Yeah, it's just really, really strong overall. If you can farm up in the early game, obviously he's very, very safe as well in the early game because of his passive being able to heal up, and also Second Wind got buffed as well. So you can use that in combination with each other just to just heal a lot of HP. So even if you do lose the early game trades, you can still use that in you know, to be able to kind of stay in laning phase for longer. And obviously all of his abilities are really, really strong. Akali mentioned about it briefly as well in the Baron lane tier list. Mid lane Akali just works a lot better just because you don't come under the same threat as what you do with Baron lane Akali. You can look to easy, because Baron lane is so long as well, like the lane is very long. Kind of hard sometimes to play passive with Akali, but in the mid lane it's a lot easier. You can just use her mobility to escape, or you could look to try and take them really quick trades and then scale up really easy to mid and late game. Lucian, we've been seeing a really interesting build with Lucian with Manamune I actually want to try out. I'll probably try it in a future video. But mid lane Lucian is still quite strong. Just his trading and everything that he has to offer and how much damage he has to offer as well is quite nice. And yeah, just overall a great duelist, which is what makes him really, really strong in the first place. But what also makes him a strong solo laner at the same time is that he can trade and he can stay back from the enemy champions. Riven as well, again, I kind of explained Riven, a lot of mobility, just struggles a little bit in the laning phase. But you can look to kind of make the same advantage with Riven as what you do with Irelia in a way, with trying to get the early game trades, but most of the time it doesn't really work out. Akshan is quite a good mid laner, to be fair. There's a lot of players that have kind of popped off with Akshan, especially a lot of people that are high on the leaderboard. Oh, I keep yawning. I've been casting all day again, so I'm just keep yawning again. I feel like I always do these tier list videos when I keep yawning for some reason, or when I'm really, really tired. I'm not really tired, but I'm just exhausted out of a long day of casting, or a long weekend, I should say. And I got more as well this week, so fun. Yeah, Akshan obviously can roam around the map a lot, very, very easily with his second ability. His passive is super annoying as well, just being able to resurrect teammates. I think it's the most annoying passive in the whole game, to be fair. And yeah, just can do a lot better in the mid lane than the dual lane, because in the mid lane you can look to play aggressive and try and utilize his passive to get the shield, so you can get trade a lot better. But obviously in the dual lane it can be a little bit more difficult. Corki as well is a great AP champion at the moment, great scaling, has a package available as well, which is really, really strong, especially that level 4 team fight, which I kind of explained briefly as well. Level 4 team fight, you can use your package, use it really, really effectively, and yeah, it's just a really, really strong champion overall as like a marksman in the mid lane. If you do want to play marksman in the mid lane, Morgana doesn't really get played in the mid lane too much. She did get like an armor buff, so she can do quite well against AD matches in the mid lane. But she kind of doesn't really just offer. She doesn't really offer too much in the mid lane, to be fair. Obviously, she has a lot of wave clear, but she doesn't really offer too much in terms of roams and everything around the map as a mid laner, or even trying to get that early game advantage. She's mainly used in the duo lane just because how passive duo lane is at the moment and how there's not really any plays happening in a duo lane. So what happens is you play Morgana in a duo lane and you can look to try and roam to the mid lane, just wave clear as much as possible. And then obviously in the team fights is where Morgana really shines, where you can use your ultimate, use your Zhonya's to just crowd control the whole enemy team. Fizz got quite a big nerf this patch, to be fair. Very, very big nerf actually in this patch. It's definitely fallen down quite a bit for me. He's, with Fizz, you can still one-shot enemies with Charm the Waters, but it can easily get countered by Zhonya's. Honestly, when you play against Fizz, you can just buy Zhonya's, and then it's just really, really easy. Or you can play champions like, I don't know, Xayah, for example, or any champions that can just go invulnerable, even Olaf, for example, any champions like that. And sometimes Fizz can struggle, because if Fizz doesn't one-shot someone, and if you use your abilities, then you're just really vulnerable as a Fizz, and you can look to try and counter that in a way, and just look to counter-engage after Fizz jumps in. Veigar just takes a long, long time to scale, to be honest. And doesn't really do that much damage at the same time. Obviously, doesn't really... The cage is really, really strong, don't get me wrong. And the abilities can be really strong. You can look to try and one-shot someone. But it's really, really hard to get to that stage of the game. You have to wait until mid and late game. And obviously, as I mentioned already, it's all kind of about that early game team fight around Dragon. Because most solo queue teammates kind of give up after that point if you lose a team fight and lose the Dragon. So again, more of a scaling champion, but can still work and can still be pretty good. A tier champion, sorry. Renekton's not really that great as a mid laner. Can work a lot better as a Baron laner. I probably could move Renekton up, to be fair. I feel like I'm doing Renekton a little bit bad justice, but anyway, Renekton can maybe move into the A+ tier, but maybe in the middle. Not too sure. He's still complete fine, to be fair. He's still quite strong as well at the same time, and he still can trade quite effectively. Going into Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol, this champion's just so useless. I don't know. I could probably move him down to B tier as well. I don't know. The champion doesn't really offer anything at all. Doesn't really offer a lot of damage. His build got really heavily nerfed, like Haunting Guys, Ryleth's Crystal Scepter from before. Obviously, I've done a guide with him as well, and I played a few games with him. He just doesn't really do that much. You just don't have the same sort of impact with Aurelion Sol as what you do with other champions, which I think is a very, very big problem. Brand as well, much better as a duo laner. Really struggles against champions that can really dive onto him. The same with Aurelion Sol as well. Both these champions struggle against assassins like Zed, like Diana, like Irelia that can jump onto them, which is why they're down here. Seraphine, a very unique mid lane pick. I think she's better as a duo laner because, again, another champion that really struggles against champions that like to dive onto you, like all the champions are like S+ and S tier. Same with Lux as well, doesn't really do too much, very unique champion. Lux mid has been played a little bit, to be fair, but again, if you have champions that can dive onto you really easy, it can be quite difficult. Annie is obviously very unique, using Proto Belt and using your Tibbers to try and get a full widespread team fight ultimate, but most side doesn't really work too well. And obviously Kayle is just Kayle, and she is pretty useless. Moving on to AD carry. Again, not really much has changed here for the AD carry role. I still think Varus is still up there as one of the best with Kai'Sa. Varus with all of his poke that he has available and everything. Obviously, it hasn't been nerfed at all. It was just really, really strong overall. And Varus just as a champion overall is very, very nice to play. Very, very strong. You can play him in many different ways as well. But his main, main points is that he can stay back and he can play very, very passive. Also do a lot of damage with his abilities at the same time. I do think that Kai'Sa is probably the best solo queue AD carry. Obviously, it does take a little while for Kai'Sa to scale. When you scale into the mid and late game, you can definitely look to try and 1v9 the game. With all of her mobility, you can turn invisible. She can use her ultimate to get a shield. She's one of them champions that is very, very strong in a solo carry situation. And that you can try and use to full effect. And obviously, if you get a few kills under your belt as well, if you get them evolves very, very early game, or very, very early on in the game, I should say, you'll be able to roam around. You'll be able to roam around the map and get a lot of kills. And obviously, the assassination probability for Kai'Sa is up there as well if you use your killer instinct aggressively. Ezreal, Ezreal's an interesting one. I think Ezreal is definitely good with Yuumi. Obviously, the Ezreal Yuumi combo is very, very strong. He is quite difficult to play, to be fair, because he relies a lot on his skill shots, and he doesn't really have a lot of damage with his auto attacks or anything as well. And yeah, like I said, he can be a little bit difficult. But honestly, if you can wait again and scale into the mid and late game, which is kind of most of the thing with these AD carries, Ezreal at like 1 or 2 items is not really that strong. But when he gets like 3 or 4 items, he can be very strong. You need to kind of wait for Manamune to stack up. And obviously, you have like 2 of the most expensive and late game items in the game. Manamune and Trinity Force, which obviously Trinity Force is super expensive, and Manamune you need to stack up. But when you have your Manamune stacked up, when you have Trinity Force and a few other items, you can definitely look to just play passive. And he's a very passive champion as well. You look to play passive and scale well into the game. Corki, I already mentioned briefly as well, but as an AD carry, you can just play a lot more passive as a Corki, allows you to scale well into the late game as well. And obviously at level 4, you have your package and everything available as well. So he can be a very, very good during early game team fights, but obviously scale well into late game as well. You go like Manamune into Solari Charge Blade, Infinity Edge as well. There is kind of a new build coming out for Corki, which hopefully I'll do a video on soon. But I'll leave that for another video. Yeah, very, very good champion overall. Very, very strong. I would recommend Corki if you're looking for kind of an AP damage source down in the dual lane. Xayah, very safe champion to play. Very, very safe AD carry to play. Does a lot of damage with her feathers as well. Is really, really good. Probably one of the safest AD carries to play, but also one of the hardest as well. Because people don't really understand how her feathers work. I've done multiple videos on Xayah, so you can have a look and have a look at the gameplay and everything on how I play Xayah. But if you know how to utilize her feathers, or you know how to get the most damage output for Xayah, then she can be really, really strong. Caitlyn is still quite strong as well. Obviously, the problem with Caitlyn. Let me take a quick drink. The problem with Caitlyn is that she doesn't really do a lot of damage, it seems like, but she's just a super, super safe AD carry to play. You have your traps, you have your net, you have your ultimate ace in the hole as well, which can do a lot of damage. And just overall, Caitlyn is a very, very strong and safe champion to play. It doesn't feel like she does as much damage to the other AD carries, but still quite strong. Lucian, honestly, could probably move up into the S+ tier. I'm really enjoying Lucian more and more as I play him more and more. I guess just because the same reason as kind of the others, where it's like he's a very, very good solo carry as an AD carry. He's very good at just kind of relying on himself, being able to dash around during team fights and doing a lot of damage. His build as well was just insanely strong. Infinity Edge, Solari Charge Blade, Serrade's Grudge, Bloodthirster, items like that. Works well with Black Cleaver as well. Blade to the Rune King and other items as well. And as I mentioned, there's kind of a new build with Manamune that I want to try as well, which is more of like a late game scaling Lucian build. It still can work really, really well. And just overall, just really, really strong. Really, really strong champion that can utilize his kit really well. Orianna, probably the best AP champion to play in the dual lane. You can see a few other AP champions, which I'll explain in a second. Orianna just has a really, really safe laning phase, can clear out waves very, very quickly, and is just really, really strong overall. And I wouldn't really put it past her to say that she's like the best AP champion in the dual lane. Obviously with Corki as well, if you class Corki as an AP champion. But as a pure AP champion, then Orianna is probably up there as one of the best. I mention this every single time. Vayne and Draven, the reason why they're in A+ tier, they are both very, very strong, but they are both very, very difficult to play for different reasons. Vayne, you need to kind of play very, very safe in the early game, and it's all about pairing up Vayne. I mean, if I was to have like a duo queue tier list, for example, which if you want to see that, let me know. Duo queue tier list, and Vayne will probably be up there with the likes of Lulu, with the likes of Yuumi. But as a solo queue pick, not really the best one, because you're relying on your team helping you as well. And you need to get at least 4 items with Vayne to get very, very strong. Draven, for a completely different reason. Draven's all about the early game, complete opposite of Vayne. Draven's all about the early game. You need to get as many stacks as possible for your passive, and then look to try and get kills. Now, if your jungler doesn't come down and help you try and get the kills and help you get the early game lead, and if you do get ganked a few times and fall behind with Draven, then you become probably the most useless AD carry in the entire game, because you struggle already in team fights because you need to try and pick up your axes, and sometimes they can fall in the wrong places. But also you'll probably be behind on gold, or even on gold. You know, with Draven, he's just not going to be as strong as other AD carries because he doesn't scale well into the mid and late game as these other hyper carries. Talking about AP mages again, you know, we've got a few other AP mages here as well. Ziggs is kind of self-explanatory. I've already explained it in the mid lane, but does a lot of damage, can play very safe, wave clear really well, and he always does the most amount of damage. Morgana as well in the dual lane is quite strong with Brand as well. Morgana and Brand we probably don't see as much anymore. We used to see them quite a lot, but not as much anymore. Obviously, Morgana got nerfed a little bit, and Brand's build is kind of a bit all over the place because she, you know, most of the time with these two champions, you like to go Ludens into Raya's Crystal Scepter and Leandri's Torment, but obviously Leandri's Torment got heavily nerfed, but it just works so well with these two champions, so it feels really bad to kind of not build them. Another champion is Seraphine that I added to the tier list. Now, obviously yesterday I did a Seraphine video in the duo lane. We're seeing it a lot more in competitive as well. It's a very situational pick, but obviously can offer so much as a dual lane pick. Obviously has the wave clear, has the early game burst damage. Electrocute is really strong with her as well, just gets much burst damage, and her team fight presence is absolutely insane. So I feel like Seraphine is slowly coming back into meta, but it's very situational. You know, you don't really want to pick Seraphine early on in the draft because it can be easily countered by likes of Brom. Trying to think who else. Yasuo as well was the other one. You know, Yasuo or Brom can be easily countered by them too. And then pretty much everything is still the same again. Obviously, Jinx is just not as much of a late game scaling champion with Tristana. Jinx is not really a great champion at the moment. Her build doesn't really benefit her a lot. And her build in general is not really as good as other AD carry builds at the moment. Tristana, very difficult to play, and again, doesn't really have the best build at the moment. Because, you know, you see most of these champions, you see that most of these champions like to build Solari Charge Blade, you know, unless it's like Varus or Ezreal that likes to build crit, and Caitlyn as well. You know, all these champions don't build Solari Charge Blade, but every single other champion builds Solari Charge Blade, which Jinx and Tristana, you can't use Solari Charge Blade at all because their cooldowns are so long and because it doesn't really benefit them, which is kind of the downside of these champions in my opinion. You can still scale up quite well into the mid and late game, but again, as a solo queue pick, I wouldn't really recommend it because you can't really solo carry on these champions. Misfortune again, as a solo carry pick, not really too strong. She did get nerfed. She did get nerfed a few patches ago, yeah, just overall, it's quite difficult to play in the current meta because when you use your bullet time and when you want to play aggressive in the lane, well, not play aggressive in the lane phase, but play aggressive during team fights and try and land your bullet time, you're going to be having them assassins and bruisers jump onto you, which could be very difficult. But in a meta where like mages come back in maybe, and we don't see like these crazy heavy dive comps that we're seeing at the moment, then maybe Misfortune can see some play, but at the moment she just can't be played at all. It's very hard to play her. Ashe, again, not really good as a solo queue carry champion. Ashe doesn't really do that much damage at all. She's more about utility. She's great during competitive play. We saw like Ashe Seraphine in the bot lane before. If you can communicate your arrow, if you're playing duo queue or trio queue, it's definitely a lot stronger. But as a solo queue pick, not really, in my opinion. Yeah, just you can't communicate when you're going to land your arrow. You sometimes obviously might miss your arrow and you become kind of useless. Obviously, you need a lot more peeling with Ashe as well because again, you're all to do with slows and crowd control. But yeah, damage output is not really there, not really the best solo queue carry. Jhin as well, just yeah. Jhin is Jhin. We've kind of spoken about Jhin quite a lot. I think a lot of people have spoken about Jhin a lot as well, and obviously Hells has spoken about Jhin a lot as well. Just as a champion, not really too strong to be fair. Very weak champion. Obviously, if you in the laner phase, he can be very good. And if you can get that early game lead, it's pretty decent. But other than that, if you go like even with Jhin, he just doesn't do as much consistent damage output because of his reload mechanic. His reload mechanic is very slow. And you just don't do as much burst damage as, say, for example, the PC League. And Veigar, in my opinion, is the worst APC to play in duo lane. You just can't really do that much. I did not mean to click on him. Let me go back to ADC. But yeah, it doesn't really offer too much. Again, more of a late game scaling AP carry. But by the time you get to late game scaling with Veigar, the game's pretty much over anyway. And his lane dominance, his lane pressure is not as strong as the other AP carries. And then lastly, we have Akshan, which I mentioned already. Which I don't think is very strong as a duo lane carry because you can't really utilize his passive too much. You can't really roam around the map too much with Akshan duo carry. It can work, but not a lot of the time. And Senna as well. Obviously, you don't want to play Senna as an AD carry. You don't want to play farming Senna in any way. You only really want to play Senna as like fasting Senna. So, yeah. Right, support. We have one champion that has moved up into the S Plus tier, and I think there's no surprise when it's going to be Yuumi that's going to be moving up into the S Plus tier. This champion got an absolutely insane buff. Crazy buff. Her Q got buffed, her W got buffed, her E didn't change actually, and her ulti got buffed, and her passive got buffed, and also her base stats. So basically everything got buffed with Yuumi, and I feel like she was strong before, but now she's just even stronger. Not the best solo queue pick, I'll be totally honest with you. It's kind of the same as Lulu in a way, where you kind of have to rely on your team a lot more. But because you can build a little bit more damage now with Yuumi, and you deal a little bit more damage with Yuumi, if you can land the ultimates as well, she can be very, very strong. And I feel like she's definitely a worthy S plus pick as well. But again, closely followed behind by the rest of the S plus tiers as well, which I think all of these champions work very, very well in different situations. Nami and Lulu, two other enchanters. Nami's great for team fighting, really good pressure during laning phase as well. Has the healing and everything available as well. Nami works really, really well with all the strong AD carries at the moment. Kai'Sa, Lucian as well. Very, very strong dual lane champion. Lulu obviously is more about helping your team and giving your team some more bonuses like health, shielding, healing, everything like that. And she's just really, really strong overall. And then Rakan and Thresh, two really, really strong champions that love to roam around the map. Great during team fights, has a lot of peel potential as well. And yeah, two champions that are just absolutely fantastic in the game at the moment. Thresh is, in my opinion, is probably the best solo queue pick. So you have your hook, you have your lantern to get people to safety, you have your flay as well, and your box to peel. And just overall a really, really great champion to play in solo queue. And Rakan for the same instance as well. You can look to engage, and you can look to be that frontline carry, and you can look to engage and kind of decide whether your team go in for a team fight. But obviously, you need to make sure your team are on the same page. S tier for supports, we have Brom, a very good disengage support. I want to say the best for solo queue because you can't really use it, use Brom very aggressively. If you're against a lot of engage and you need that disengage potential, then Brom can definitely work very, very well. Morgana as well, you can build Morgana as an AP support if you want to. Can definitely offer a lot as well as an AP support with the ultimate, with the amount of lane pressure that she has as well with the dark binding and her wave clear. It's very, very powerful. Galio as well, already mentioned, the team fight presence that Galio offers. You can build him as a tank as well and support, and you can still do a lot of damage at the same time. Leona's quite an interesting one. We don't really see Leona too much in competitive play. She's very, very good in solo queue. She's more of a champion that likes to, get them picks and get the solo picks as well. Trying to dive in and kind of burst one champion down with the combos. It's worked many, many times for many, many different players in solo queue, and I definitely feel like she is a very, very strong tank in the support role. A plus, we still have Senna in there. Senna's quite good if you want to play. If you don't really want to rely on your team too much, you can play Senna as like a kind of, I guess, fasting Senna in a way and build a bit of damage. Wouldn't really recommend it. Even utility Senna still does a lot of damage with Black Cleaver, Iceborne Gauntlet, and items like that. Honestly, most of the time, Senna just really, really well. But she is quite difficult to play, and there's a lot of memes around her being like the worst support. But honestly, she's not that bad. You just need to know how to play her. Anstar is definitely a very, very strong support. I feel like he can definitely move up a tier, maybe. Great during team fights, has insane level 2 combo as well, but just struggles a lot. Struggles a lot against the champions that are currently meta, and can kind of struggle when, especially at level 1 as well. Level 1, you just become the most useless champion in the game. You only really have headbutt or pulverize, but when you get to level 2 and level 3, you can look to try and engage and get an early game advantage. And obviously during team fights, really, really big tank. And look to try and engage as well at the same time. But again, you kind of need your team on the same page. And Janna is just, in my opinion, the weakest out of the enchanters, or out of the strong enchanters, I would say. I'll still say Janna's pretty good with all her shielding and her healing that she has to offer. And her disengage is really, really good. But again, as a solo queue pick, she doesn't really offer too much in terms of, engaging and trying to carry your team in a way, but really good for disengaging, to be fair. Again, more of a duo queue pick, I would say, if you have an AD carry with you that you trust and you want to defend. Seraphine and Sona are very, very unique. Obviously, Seraphine I already mentioned is probably good as a duo queue carry. You can build Senna as supporters, as a support, or as a carry as well in the support role. You can go like Staff and Foam Water, or you can go like Luden's Death Cap. You can build damage if you want to. There's so many different ways you can build Seraphine. Obviously, our ultimate's very strong as well, which I already mentioned. Sona is a very mid and late game champion. Really, really struggles in the early game. I think I remember there was a Wild Rift European Championship game where it was Sona Ziggs in the bot lane, and they got absolutely stomped because you can't really do anything as Sona. Sona in the lane phase is just completely useless. You're just trying to poke and stack up your tier as much as possible. If you can get to that mid and late game with Sona, then she can be very, very strong. She can keep healing, keep shielding, keep giving movement speed. Her ultimate's quite good during team fights as well. But it's just getting to that point, which is really, really tough part. And what I feel like is kind of the struggle with Sona, because because the early game is so important in solo queue, and it kind of gives your team that little bit of momentum. I feel like you need them early game champions that can help your team, and obviously Solo doesn't really offer too much. Speaking of early game, Set's kind of the complete opposite, to be fair. The problem with Set at the moment is that when you have him as a support, most of the time you build Set as a full tank. The full tank Set just doesn't really work too well. You mainly want to build Set with like damage, like Blade Rune King, Black Cleaver. But with support, you build like Dead Man's Play, Force of Nature, all these sort of tank items, and they just don't work with him, unfortunately. He just doesn't become as tanky as what he does in like League of Legends, for example. But he's still really, really strong early game champion. If you can get an early game advantage with him, you can use Aftershock with him, and he can be really good. Soraka is a very, very strong champion. I say very, very strong champion. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I was just thinking about something in my head. Soraka is not a very, very strong champion. I take that back. She gets countered by one item really, really easy. You know, Executioner's Calling, Morellonomicon. She can be quite strong. She can do a lot of healing. Okay, so the way that I see it is that Soraka is broken before the enemy champions build anti-heal. Now, there's situations where the enemy team might not understand about anti-heal, understand how anti-heal works, and Soraka just couldn't just be strong throughout the whole game. But as soon as someone builds Executioner's Calling, what's the item? Executioner's Calling, Morellonomicon, or Bramble Vest, if any of them get built at all, then Soraka just becomes completely useless because she relies so much on her healing. But either way, she's kind of meh. Yeah, strong until anti-heal is being built. Blitzcrank just only has his hook. If you can't land your hook, you're useless. Don't play Blitzcrank in my games if you don't know how to use the hook, please. I beg you, please. Don't play Blitzcrank. But no, he's okay. I mean, he's probably one of the best playmaking supports as well. Because if you do land the hook, then you can put him towards your team. You can use all your other abilities to kind of so the rest of your team can follow up as well. But again, if you don't land your hook, kind of useless. Lux has completely fallen out of the meta for supports as well. You don't really want to build her damage. Her support build doesn't really work too much anymore, and just she doesn't really offer too much as a support. And then the Moo, kind of a niche pick for support, but again, doesn't really offer too much. But anyway, that is my tier list for patch 3.0b. Sorry if I just made a really loud noise there for me banging my table. But that's everything. That's every single role in the game. Let me know your opinions on the roles. As you can see, all the champions and everything here. But no one in D tier, and the only champions in C tier are Nasus and Teemo. But you can see my video at the bottom of the tier list as well. If you don't know this website is Wild Rift Fire. This is a website where I go through every single champion in the game, and you can see guides for every single champion as well. So, for example, Set, you can see the build, you can see the runes that I run, everything as well, and I have a complete guide as well, which takes you through all the abilities, combos, build breakdowns, everything like that as well. So if you do want to check out Wild Rift Fire, highly recommend it. Any thoughts or any feedback is always greatly appreciated. But yeah, thank you very much for watching this video. It was a long one, but it was one that I always enjoy doing because I like going through tier lists with you all. Yeah, have a good rest of the day. Take care of yourself. I'll see you all in the next Wild Rift video. Peace.